We're live. Hello. So, camera. First of all, thanks so much for coming over. We've got this small launch today. Hopefully, it's going to work out. We have a lot of new research. We have a lot of new data, and it might be a little bit rough around the edges with some of the last-minute prep, but the content and the research we have on e-commerce will be worth it. Let me share my screen real quickly. Here we go. And before I begin, is there anyone out there? Type in the chat where you're from, who you are. I would want to adjust it to the group we have. We'll have some Q&A. It's not going to be a long webinar, but we're going to go through a lot of data quickly. And if you saw any of our previous SGE content, I'm going to do whatever possible not to repeat the same stuff. So we'll go right into it. Hello, Daniel. I'm going to give everyone one more minute. Hey, Christopher, France. Oh, amazing. Stefan, Macedonia. Oh, wow, that's amazing. So we have a nice group from Cape Cod. I love it. So it's a good time zone. I'm in Austin, Texas, so I'm a bit, it's like 10 a.m. for me. It was an intense morning to prep, but with all that, let's slowly get going. A very quick intro. My name is Bart. I'm leading innovation at Onely and at ZipTie. I'm extremely passionate about everything when it comes to crawling, rendering, indexing. And over the last 9 months, I got obsessed with SGE, along with my good friend and my colleague from previously R&D at Onely, now co-founder at ZipTie, Tomek. We'll have a good announcement within ZipTie for you, but let's keep moving. So first of all, oh, hey, Mateusz. So first of all, we're going to go, this is a little bit of an agenda, and I'm really triggered by the fact that my animations for these bullet points didn't work out, but I can live with this. So let's go through that. So we're going to go over as something I was extremely passionate about, and I heard so many how do I say that nicely? So many conspiracy theories around how Google is approaching higher and lower PPCs. Kai, I'm aiming for 45 minutes, but bear with me. Most of the data we should go through within 30. Coming back, the question of how long it's going to take. I'm going to do my best to go quick today. But anyhow, PPC is one. So we have a lot of cool data of how different SGE coverage is with high PPC cost queries versus low. Some of the winners and losers, and this is something we're still trying to comprehend and understand. A/B tests that SGE is running. Backlinks, this is something we don't fully have analyzed by today, but we're gonna get into that just a little bit, and we're gonna launch our new ZipTie toolset. So first of all, for those of you who never played with SGE, I don't think there is anyone like this in the audience, but this is how SGE looks like. It's a different layout of SERP than what we're used to with Google, with 10 blue links, and a lot of these things are changing. So looking even at the screen here, this is from, I think, December. At this stage, some of the new layouts are different. Let's go right into e-commerce. And I should have noted that here, this is just for the e-commerce vertical. So first of all, I want to start it big. So 87% of e-commerce queries, and this is based on 25,000 queries, for e-commerce only, and we've analyzed around 200,000 or more queries over the last few months. So these numbers are fairly similar niche by niche, but they change just a little bit since December. Let me give you just a little bit of background on the research. So we've done a lot of research over the last few months. We scrape SGE since, we proudly scrape SGE since July. And this research is focused on, actually, this is from our main research. So let me go to the next slide. So this is 20,000 queries, short, mid, and long tail. And even the long tail one, we try to keep, we use Ahrefs definition of that. Sorry, just a bit of coffee. It's still morning. So we used Ahrefs definition just to blame it on them. of short, mid, and long tail based on potential traffic, and we basically use that to group our keywords. And we've gathered quite a lot of data. So not only SGE and Google rankings, but also we visited all the pages, all the sources to see what's happening, to see what differentiates some of the results. So this is a very, very comprehensive research. We're going to go just to a little bit of that today because we're still polishing some of the data science. So let's me jump right into key findings. First of all, this is something I'm extremely excited about. There is a ton of myths and let's just say conflicting information about SGE being somehow powered by featured snippets. And if you know a little bit at this stage about how SGE works, SGE has a completely different set of objectives as a product than featured snippets, and logic behind that is also completely different. So looking at that, just to summarize these data points, actually, Tomek, do you wanna contribute maybe to this slide? You this is your analysis. I don't wanna say something, and
yeah, sure. So basically, we analyzed for how many queries, for what percentage of queries we can see featured snippets and SGE results. And it seems that featured snippet appeared on just 1.3% of queries, while SGE got much higher coverage. When it was automatic response, it was 22% in the case of e-commerce stores, and forced SGE response was 64%. So when we compare feature snippets, it's very, very tiny, 1% versus SGE 87%. So there is a huge difference between feature snippets. So we cannot say SGE is a new feature snippet because it's something completely different.
Yeah, we can see that the number of featured snippets within this sample, and please bear in mind that the logic we took to gather these keywords is we took some of the largest e-commerce stores in the US and we've exported the keywords they driving the most traffic to 5 or 6 biggest e-commerce. We cleaned them up, deduplicated them, and so on. So this is not probably the same sample we would have for publishers with featured snippets, but still the data here is super exciting. Basically, we can see that for e-commerce, yeah, we can completely debunk the featured snippet theories out there. I'm sorry. And now this is where it gets really exciting because we're going to have more and more slides like this. So this one is extremely interesting for me because we can see, and this is going to be even more interesting with PPC, but looking at short, mid, and long tail queries, it's fairly obvious that for the most popular queries with the most traffic, for the most popular with the most traffic queries with the most traffic, SGE is present way more often than for long tail, which is something I would assume logically, but it's nice to have this on paper. So that's quite interesting, but bear with me before we move forward. So first of all, what we also talked about in previous webinars and in some of the research, we're still working to publish all of that on paper next week. But SGE operates on a completely different set of ranking factors, and we have enough data to 100% prove it with any potential niche, vertical, or set of metrics. But why I'm mentioning that here is that as 71% of all SGE sources don't rank top 10 for the same query. So basically looking at SGE sources and Google search, two completely different databases, two completely different sets of results. So this differentiates it from Perplexity AI, from Bing AI. So basically for all these other search engines, Google created something that is completely new as a product based on a different set of data points, actually merging informational content with transactional queries here. So, and I could go on about this for hours. Anyhow, this is quite interesting. Basically, we have data to prove that. So I forgot about this. So looking at, okay, Tomek, I need your help here. I'm going to take a sip of water. Can you explain this one? I always get confused trying to simplify that.
So when we compare the traditional search results versus SGE, it seems 7 out of 10 results in SGE don't come from top 10 of traditional SERP. So that's a huge difference. And then we can see that, okay, for traditional SERPs, traditional search results, pages that get positioned between 1 and 3 has 7% of chances to get into SGE. Pages with positions 4 to 6 has 6% of chances. Pages between 7 and 10 has also 7% of chances. But yeah, the main takeaway from this is that, of course, getting higher in terms of traditional search results gives you higher chance of getting into SGE, but most of the sources don't come from top 10. So that's the huge difference. That proves that it's completely different algorithm that the traditional search results.
Yeah, and just to even simplify that even more, basically, if you rank top 1, your chance of being included in SGE sources is 7 to 8% if we round it up. However, what's also quite interesting here is this sample is different from our big sample. So in our large sample of, I think, 150 to 100,000 queries, ranking, and okay, this is changing, so I hope that didn't change over last week, but ranking position 1 in overall samples gives you 17% chances of being an SGE source. So we can see that here for e-commerce, and we're going to see that through more of the data here. So e-commerce is I would say it's the first battleground for SGE, and it's the biggest push from the SGE side to change it completely. And we can discuss that because there is a little bit of background behind it, of Google trying to compete with Amazon, losing market share to Amazon, and so on. So this is, I think, how they are tackling that. Obviously, outside of the whole AI battle, and everyone now scaring Google that they will be the next search engine. But let's not digress. Let's move forward. So this is my favorite slide. So what we can see here, and I had so many conversations with SEO saying like Google is going to go after high PPC. I wasn't that sure until seeing this data. And we assumed brackets for different prices of SGE. So I think this is really exciting to see. Exciting, maybe it's not the best expression here, but this is fascinating to see that basically looking at very high PPC cost, you have almost 100% chance of having SGE result. So Google is going heavily after high PPC spenders, and with e-commerce losing some of the organic traffic, that's something to have a look at. And I think this is a nightmare for a lot of executives for e-commerce, but yeah, facts are facts. So let's look at some winners and losers, and this is a little bit different than what we've seen years ago with Searchmetrics and Systrix and so on, because here winners and losers are coming from basically completely different product or layout. So this is still e-commerce. This is the same sample. However, if you look at that, URLs in the carousel and URLs linked anywhere within the text, these URLs would track, because the URLs for products, they go to a whole other expendable thing. And this is, again, a whole other webinar. But all the URLs that Google links as sources of the content, the data, are mostly taken from the content websites. And Bob Villa, when I first saw that, I didn't know that it was a TV show here in the US. And it looks like and I'm sorry, Bob, I'm sure you're not watching this, but it looks like a link network website. So my first look was with this is just some mistake, but I saw this for so many of our clients over the last year as the main competitor that it was shocking. So Bob Villa is killing it within the SGE. USA Today, and USA Today was also a winner of last year's organic winner with the most growth in the US. So whatever USA Today team, USA Today's team is doing, they definitely know how to do it well. We can see that this is quite spectacular. So Bob Villa, USA Today, Good Housekeeping, these growths are massive. LinkedIn, PCMag, YouTube, obviously, and YouTube with Gemini. Google is understanding parts of the video, and it's showing just a small part of the video marked in SGE answering your very specific question. So you're not gonna get like the full YouTube video, but just a specific part of your reply. And obviously everything that goes with UGC, user-generated content. And I'm shocked not to see Reddit here with how much visibility they're gaining. But as you can see here, these are winners in the e-commerce space with all the carousel rankings. Now this is going to be quite interesting. Let's go into losers. And this is not exact science with comparing winners and losers when the whole experience is going to be changed, but the data is correct. It's just it's a migration to a new experience. So the biggest losers here are quite interesting as well. So Bed Bath & Beyond, HM. So these are, as you can see, mostly e-commerce, and we'll see like a deep dive. I think we have data for Samsung, we have data for Apple, like in-depth SGE data that we're gonna dive into in a second. But in general, most of the e-commerce stores we see, it's very almost unusual to see gains within the SGE ecosystem. So it's a massive shift. But there are some things you can do to prepare that. But before I go into the next step, I also want to show you, before I go into some of the next cool stuff, I want to show you some of the changes we see at SGE. So this is showing up more and more often. So for a lot of queries, you will see that the ads are going on top. So I was wondering, how is Google gonna go around ad placement? They are probably testing that solution to have SGE result kind of underneath the ad carousel. So that happens very, very often recently, especially in the US market. And that's how it looks like when we expand the carousel. So when you press generate, and basically for all of you who look at our data, this is what we call force generated, when you have to click generate. And when you click generate, you have a lot of ads on top for 65-inch TV. This is the query. And then you see ads and you see the SGE results. So I'm wondering if that's how they're going to blend ads with the new SERP layout. I don't know. But there's a lot of tiny changes. We're just listing some of the changes we see. This is a pain for us scraping. We have to rewrite a lot of code every single time that happens. But this is interesting. So there are more and more queries with no carousel on top. Some sources here, but there's more and more queries, including some of ours, like something around JavaScript indexing. Some of the queries that we get a lot of traffic from are also queries either without carousel or with no sources whatsoever. So Google is generating the content based on, I'm assuming, Gemini or their database, and they don't mention any sources. So that's quite interesting that there are more and more no carousel SGE rankings. Sorry, SERPs, not rankings. So this is like a very worrisome. This is a zero-click result. So I hope they won't go this way, because that's going to stir up a lot of content websites completely. So let's go into some of the e-commerce blocks and hacks. So first of all, and this is something we published 2-3 years ago, seeing that removing this SEO content underneath category pages increases the rankings in quite a lot of stores in the US, or I think Zillow did it first, and saw like a massive increase in visibility because Google is not indexing that part of the text anyways very often with partial indexing. But what we see, SGE is not feeding on these parts of the content almost never. So so this is something that's not going to be too useful. And secondly, and this is something we mentioned in the previous webinar, and I'm leading to this because this goes to the next point. So we see that one of the key things changing whether you're going to rank or show up at SGE as a source is the cost of your rendering, cost of your JavaScript execution, or very simple, plain English. Basically, the lighter your website is, the easier it is to show up. But why I'm mentioning that is we've done a study, and this study was done by Jakub from our team, and it was based on 140,000 queries from multiple verticals, not only e-commerce. And what we've seen is SGE is feeding on different sorts of content, which is quite interesting. So it's mostly HTML body, And then the second best, so from 88% for HTML, the second best is meta description. So SGE is sometimes feeding on meta descriptions. And again, JavaScript content, so JavaScript dependent content is at this stage 3.5%. We're researching that more and more, but it seems that this kind of goes in line with what we've seen in the research from November, is that Google prefers, especially SGE, I'm assuming they are very tight on resources, as all the AI companies nowadays, this is the chokehold, are not using a lot of JS. Schema markup, meta title, we've seen these being used in generating of SGE response, but it's a minor percentage. So we can assume that Google SGE doesn't speak JavaScript, which is quite surprising. I was under the impression that if you have very lightweight JavaScript, or maybe these dependencies don't take a lot of scripting, they would show up, but it seems that this is the case. We're doing more research to find out more, but this is quite interesting. I don't think it's going to be the case long term, but so far it didn't change over the last few months. So a few ugly slides ahead. This is just fresh research, so these are raw experts, but I think they're going to be valuable. And so what we've done is we've analyzed a lot of large brands, and one of these was Apple.com. We've exported top 1,000 keywords. For most brands, we would remove branded queries. I think, however, Google is going to change. The branded queries are still, I hope, gonna get to you through Google. In this case, it was impossible because a lot of Apple products are like Apple Watch and so on. So it's top 1,000 with branded keywords. Let's go. So as you can see, this is the ugly slide. I apologize. Oh, hey, Jamek. I apologize for the ugliness of it, but for Apple, it's quite interesting because the SGE is enabled for 86% of the queries, with 12, let's say almost 13% being auto-generated, and 82% force-generated, meaning you have to press generate. So what does it mean? If we look at that further, because that's quite interesting, the SGE is generated for these for 86% of the queries, but Apple.com is visible in sources in 23%. And it might look miserable, but honestly, it's one of the best results, one of the good results we've seen with Tomek. So that's quite interesting, because even though you show up in one of the sources, very often you either show kind of more like deeper in the carousel, or you're diluted by so many other websites. But we can also estimate the search volume. So based on the search volume of these queries, we can also estimate how that looks like. This changes quite a bit, as you can see. And lastly, we can see how do they look with carousel rankings. So that's unfortunately not too good. Only 1%, let's say, we don't have position number 3 for whatever reason on our chart. In our chart, maybe they didn't have any. But if we combine 1 and 2, which is everything you see on the carousel, is 1, 2, 3. I think there are just, I know there are just 3 results. Then you see only quick math, 12% of in 12% they rank high in the carousel. So Apple has quite a lot of work to do to mitigate this risk. And looking at SGE sources versus organic rankings, this is also a little bit different spread than we usually see. That's why I used Apple.com. And let me explain that. This is easy, but you have to stretch your brains for just 1 minute. So looking at the spread here, if source, if a URL being a source for SGE ranks position 1 through 3, so that's basically what Tomek and I was explaining before, we can see that ranking 1 to 3 in organic traditional Google gives you 10% of chances of being included as a source. So as you can see, each of these, and I won't explain the whole thing, but I think you know the case. So what we can see here is for each website, and not only for the vertical, these results are completely different. And what is quite interesting, that the websites competing the most with Apple at SGE in top carousels, and all the content all the carousels, all the sources feeding content. Yeah, all the sources used by generative AI to create content. I think that's the best. And we see that quite a bit, that Google is showing more and more often blog.google. And what they usually show is that the data, the content was generated from Google's database. This percentage is growing like massively, and I can't say that I love it, because they go somehow towards ChatGPT with that. And what I loved about SGE, because we know that AI is coming, is that they merge two experiences, just like Perplexity. If you used it, they merge search and Gen AI. In this case, they seem to be trying to keep some of the traffic here. But outside of blog Google, we see PC Max, CNET, eBay, Tom's Guide. So as you can see, Apple is not a top competitor in SG for its own queries. So that's a completely complete rehaul. And that's usually because Google is feeding content pieces for the top of the page, and then underneath list products, not necessarily from the apple.com website, because for each product you have multiple options. That being said, some e-commerce stores will be affected more than others, and I just want to show you an example of a few more. We have too many. If you look at Samsung and Walmart, first of all, if you remember Apple.com, Samsung being, I don't want to say like similar, but close to Apple in a way, has completely different stats. But if we compare Samsung to Walmart, obviously these are two different types of e-commerce. This is completely different. For Walmart, there is almost no auto-generated SGs, which is fascinating. There's just 2%. That's why we use it. It's an edge case, definitely. Oh, this is bad. We were supposed to have more examples. So how to prepare, and I have this amazing quote to inspire you, hopefully. I've spent a good 7 minutes building this slide. So let's move forward, because what I want to show you is how you can prepare for SG Impact for less than $100. That's a little bit of a clickbait, but it's true. And I want to walk you through, and again, live demo, what can go wrong. I literally, because I was preparing this presentation until the last minute, which is not something I should probably say, but I just really wanted to get this research out there. I never played with a new version of ZipTie scraping SG results. So this is me kind of unboxing that live. So and we'll get to all the questions in a sec. This is not a long demo, but what we've created at ziptie.dev is we created an option to scrape SG results. We're doing some fixes. This is still in beta. This was launched literally 35 minutes ago. So yeah, agile approach. But this is skims.com, one of the most explosive e-commerce here recently in the US by, I think, Kim Kardashian. My daughter would probably say more about this. But what we started to create is all of our ugly Excel reports are now automated. So what you can see here is, first of all, we analyzed top 1,000 queries as well. And we see with automatic, so auto response from SG is 130, forced, and how many of these you show up for. So end of the day, we can see not only where you show up, and also where you are within top 3 as a source. So 15%, not too bad looking at some of the other websites. So you can start looking into a lot of data points. So actually Skims is not that bad when it comes to share of voice. Obviously blog.google is winning. I don't think this is going away. And you can see how that looks like organically. So organic versus SG, a beautiful comparison. Actually didn't see that, Tomek. Good job, guys, at ZipTie. And we can see all of the results when it comes to different queries and different domains. Moving down, and I literally didn't use that before. This is not one of these fake demos. This is the first time I'm clicking through this. They didn't want to let me in before. But we can actually look into all of these keyword by keyword. we can see that this was maternity shapewear was actually automatically with SGE response, and they show top 3 in SERPs. Let's click on it. Let's have a look at how we can analyze that real quick. And I want to get to the Q&A, so I'm not going to take too long. Don't worry, guys. So what we can see is we've got regular SERPs. I'm speaking so fast, I have to drink. We have regular SERPs, and we've got SG response fully explained with all of the products, how this looks like. We've got response height. Oh, wow, 2.4K pixels. That's massive. And we can see follow-up questions. Basically, all of the data we have available at SGE. We scrape. We actually work on some other improvements as well. Tomek, do you think this is going to work? Full page screenshot. Let's see.
Why not?
Oh, so I'm wondering how can I share that, because this is a very, very long screenshot. This is like one of these that you can just see.
You can take a screenshot of just SGE response, so it's shorter.
Yes. So basically, this is a screenshot, I think, from the top of the SGE up to the bottom of top 60 results within Google. But we can see, and I guess I won't try to figure it out how to show it throughout the live demo. But we have a full page screenshot. I think we have to work on our imagination on this one. Apologize. And we have the SGE only screenshot as well, which is amazing. So moving forward, we can run a quick check to refresh this to see, because it's changing so often. So this is schemes. That was quite interesting. And yeah, I loved it. So let's look. And if we have Search Console connected, you'll be able to do some other stuff. But now let's look at Walmart real quick. And obviously, we didn't check indexing or Search Console, but SGE. Ooh, Tomek, do we have it? Yes. Oof. Live demos. I cannot imagine how Bill Gates felt when the blue screen showed up when he was presenting Windows. That must have been quite interesting. But whoa. So Walmart has 0 queries within top 3, which is not fun for Walmart. And as you can see, schemes had a very decent coverage here compared to Walmart. So this is something where we can see why. So I know a bit about Walmart because we've been kind of creeping on them for a while. They're an interesting website, and they have a ton of JS dependencies. It's a very heavy website, so I was really curious of how they're going to manage this SGE change. And I don't want to geek into that too much, but both ChatGPT, Sam Altman, like all of these big AI players, they have one big, and you can Google that, there are a ton of articles, interviews, one big challenge, which is the amount of resources available. And what they mean by that is just not financial resources, which I'm assuming is always the case, but computing power. So when Google is launching SGE and all these other products are launching their AIs, the key thing they're trying to optimize is the cost of computing power. So in this case, JavaScript rendering is the biggest chokehold for SGE. The end of the off-top, looking at the data, looks exciting. And we can switch on monitoring. We can monitor that every few days. And I think I'm not going to bore you with more details. Let's just quickly look, because I want to peek into the third domain, and we can move forward. Home Depot. Home Depot, show me yourself. It's a usual zip tie is faster. I got just for today access to the admin version, so I'm drag on power. So Home Depot is not doing well as well. So as you can see, schemes with a mass, and I don't want to geek into that. Schemes wins with indexing, so they have 91% indexing, very lightweight website. And it seems that this is really, so the JavaScript execution in this case as well is driving Bob Villa. Ha! This guy is going to be a celebrity soon. Again, looking into some of the data, and that's quite interesting. But what I wanted to see is auto response and force response very heavy. So queries covered are fairly high. Anyhow, end of the demo. Let's go back to the presentation for one more second, and we're going to go to questions. before I lose you all. I know how difficult attention is nowadays myself. So first of all, oh, come on. Yeah, we're not going to do another demo, don't worry. So first of all, if you want to play with that, go to ziptie.dev. You can use the coupon SG24, get a massive discount for a 1-year account. With the standard one, you can get 1,000 queries of SG queries per month. And trust me, with Scorch the Web, this is super cheap. We wanted to really make it available. Obviously, you can have a different regular, like medium or advanced subscription with that, but we wanted to give you a massive jump because we have so many questions regarding the SG scrapes. Also, if you're not in our Tech SEO United, please join. We had a slower month and a half with the SG research, but we're really coming back to Q&As, webinars, as you can see, and everything else. And if you, oh, that's not something I wanted to show. Let's move forward. So summarizing, and we have Q&A just after that. 87% of queries for e-commerce have SG enabled, so that's one. Secondly, SG is powered by a completely different algo than Google, and we have some backlinks data, something I promised to show. We really need to double and triple check, but it seems that SG sources are not really powered by backlinks, but I know how painful that info might be, so I really want to triple check that before we launch this information, but we've done it on a massive sample to see, okay, are backlinks really important for SG? Because this is an LLM algo looking for text, and it's not URL based. So why would they use backlinks? It seems that this theory is correct. And you don't have to rank for a search query at all if your content is structured in a way that answers the question in a simple way. And that's, again, a topic for a whole other webinar. It's not really based on your page. It's based on your content mostly. So this is quite interesting. And if you've seen our previous e-commerce SG, like this is all based on user journeys. That's why keywords kind of change so much, and follow-up questions become so much more important. So this is going to change the user journeys. Whoever is going to jump into that first is going to win, and we can go over that in depth in a other webinar. And if you start, even if not optimizing, because I know a lot of people are skeptical whether it's going to go live or not, which, if you read any news from Google, massive layoffs to push the resources towards AI and all these other things, I have zero doubts that this is going to be launched, especially that they push it every single day. They hire more people, and this is really something that I see exploding soon. But even if you don't want to start optimizing, at least start tracking the metrics, at least start looking how your website is going to be affected. And if you're in Europe, you have, and I'm assuming most of you are, you have a bit more time than we have here in the US, but it's still nice to at least know the optics for what's coming. So thank you, and let's go into questions. Oof, Carolina, I'm proud of our timing. Okay, let's go into the chat, see some of the questions. So let's try to decode that. When making some first tries with Gemini, yeah. So Gemini and SG are completely different tools. I'm assuming that over time, Gemini is going to show sources. I actually didn't play with Gemini for a few weeks now. I'm waiting for 1.5 to be released, and I think it will be released any day. But it's a completely different tool. So Gemini and this LLM is trained once, and then it has to build replies based on your questions. SG is using a little bit of the database, but it's generating answers kind of on the fly based on the content online. So it's more focused on freshness and user journeys, interactions with what's fresh on the web. So that's a little bit of a difference from, so SG is completely different from Gemini, from ChatGPT, and even from Bing AI or Bing connected with ChatGPT. The closest thing right now to SG is Perplexity with Jeff Bezos. who claims that it's going to take over Google. And if you use Perplexity, you can test it for free. They actually do a lot of queries, I think through Bing, and then they mush the content from these queries together with the database from ChatGPT, and they generate the answer. The experience is actually quite nice, and I would say that Perplexity is the closest, Bing AI being second, being close third. Okay. I hope that answers the question. Yes. Susan, that's a good question. I'm assuming the JSON is used to fetch something from the database, and it creates either, depending on how it's structured, either a more expensive rendering and more page resource load in Google Search Console, or a higher time to first byte, depending on how your website is structured. So yes, that's going to be more difficult. What you can do is you can play with scripting time. So you can go into Chrome DevTools, you can run a performance check, simulating a median device, or you can use some external tools to have a lab environment and see how much of your rendering goes into JavaScript execution code. So basically scripting time in the pie chart. That's going to give you the answer. With a median device, I would aim for anything below 600 milliseconds. And that's usually where we see the cutoff for SGE. But again, we're researching that way more in depth. But at this stage, this seems to be a blocker. Yeah. So big e-commerce websites will go down. Doesn't have Apple too high complexities. Yeah. I don't understand the second part. If Martin, if you could maybe explain that in the chat. At this stage, it seems like so looking a little bit of the background, because I've been obsessed with this for a few more. That's my mic. Okay, I'm back. Tomek, thumbs up. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes, thumbs up.
So big, the problem that Google has right now is they have all-time lowest market share, and they don't lose that market share only to Bing, which is also winning with Bing AI, but most of that goes to Amazon, goes to Facebook, goes to basically other places. So in the US here, if you want to buy something 90% of the time, you're going to use Amazon and have it on your doorstep within a few minutes. So Google is losing mostly to that. So my theory here is they want to create a very immersive shopping experience, because, for example, what SGE does that no other tool can do is they fetch all of the reviews of the product from whole World Wide Web. We have some slides on that in a different deck, and they show pros and cons of a product based on aggregated UGC. So all of these aspects I'm seeing for SGE is creating this very immersive shopping experience, because right now, most of my friends here in Austin, they don't even do complex Google searches. They don't interact with long-form content. They want to have a very quick answer straight up. And I think ChatGPT can confirm this proof of concept of how people want to consume the data. But also, what's one of the top problems, if you see engagement time for most of the large websites, especially publishers, is going down. So people want to spend less time, or attention span is slower. So as an example, USA Today, BBC, all of these largest publishers, they have average time on page of 1 minute, with Fox News, so our kind of gossip, spammy, or maybe more right-wing website. I'm not that good with that here in the US yet, but that website has 4 or 5 minutes, I think, engagement. So it's more going into bingeable content or very quick interactions. And a lot of e-commerce stores very often kind of fail to deliver top pros and cons of a product. They would show you long form presentations, technical data. And if you, for example, search for iPad versus Samsung, the tablet, you won't see a lot of technical data. You will see benefits, pros and cons. So SGE creates if you spend a few hours playing with some complex user journeys, SGE creates a very immersive experience. And I think this is how they want to lure people in from other places of the web. And large complex structures usually are tricky. I don't think Apple is that bad with both indexing, and I have the data somewhere. So I don't think Apple has that problem, but they definitely have a problem of simply communicating pros and cons of their product or stuff like that. So they basically are very technical. I hope that answers the question. If not, I'm happy to follow up. SGE differences by CMS used. We didn't have this research yet, and I think this is a fascinating question. I would basically look into maybe not the CMS itself, because Google doesn't really care about that as much as the cost of visiting that page. But we'll probably run a few tests in the future. Oh, I'm very confident about the US. I know this is the battleground for Google here quite a bit, and I cannot share all of the data, I know, but based on a lot of fights between Google, Bing, and even some of that you can actually see in the leaked public trial info from Google antitrust lawsuit last year. They actually showed quite a lot of interesting emails that can answer some of these questions. But I think it's going to be launched as soon as they're ready in the US. And this is all about resources. That's why even I think last week they have another round of layoffs explaining that, pushing funds towards AI. And I feel like if we're looking at EU and SGE, ChatGPT broke a lot of rules all around the planet. However, it still sustains. And I think this is a little bit of the same story. That's probably going to have a Netflix documentary in a few years. So I don't think that Google is going to be extremely worried about the legal aspects. They're just going to try to push it forward. Right now, there are few large players openly going after Google, and for the first time in the history, they actually have the chances to do so. So I think Google is going to push, and it might get hectic. For SGE, that's not that much of a problem. They so right now, the way that Google is structured, if you search for Apple Watch, which I don't have, but let's assume I have an Apple Watch. If I search for Apple Watch, number one is going to be apple.com, always. In like iPad, MacBook, so on. It's not the case with SGE. So with SGE, we will have a description of Apple Watch fetched from usually sources outside of apple.com. I don't think apple.com has a simple English review of Apple Watch. They usually have a very techy language or very visual language. So what happens now, if you Google that within SGE, you will see real users' reviews mushed together into description, like a small description, because it's this a transactional query on top. And then you will see the products linking to Amazon, linking to Apple as well. But that's the change. Google wants to create an experience when you have an option to compare the prices, to have like all info about the product. So this is a change in the UX, and Apple's architecture, I think, is not really the biggest problem. It's how they talk about the product, how they feed the web with some info about the benefits of that. I hope this answers that. This is a podcast conversation. CTRs from SGE. I wish I had a way to do so. This is my biggest question as well. So Wojciech, I love where your brain is going here. I don't know. So nobody on this planet outside of Google knows that. There is no way of checking CTRs because there is not enough search volume. Yeah. So Tomek, go on. You looked into that as well.
Basically, what's now, if SGE now it's in the labs, it's mostly used by early adopters. So they react differently than the real users that will be used SGE. So we could have that data from clickstream providers, but even data from clickstream providers will be based on early adopters who act differently. So even if they have such a data and they publish such a data, I would think that this kind of data is valid because it will be based on early adopters, not, I would say, real users, like massive users, because they can basically use it differently.
And like going into, again, a tiny educated guess, let's just call it that. I think that's why they launched in India so quickly, to gather more user data, because they have to do it in the form of labs, I'm assuming for a ton of legal reasons. So I think, I hope they will start reporting these data points in Search Console soon. But anyhow, right now, I don't think anyone outside of Google knows the CTRs, unfortunately. But yeah, that's interesting. Mateusz, that's a beautiful question, and we work with a lot of huge publishers. But what I have to mention here, new content is still going to be consumed by users. However, looking into engagement data into some of the largest e-commerce, the largest publishers on the planet, not too many people read multiple 15-20-minute article a week, and this is slowly decreasing. So what we see is we have very long engagement time on publishers' websites from a lot of developing countries, and US, UK, Germany, Europe has very short engagement time with most of the content. And this is a whole other conversation. Also, I'm highly recommending Google Trail docs, but it's basically the answer. So SGE answers to the challenge of people don't want to read the whole article anymore. People don't want to read so much. They just want to have the answer to the question. So I think long form content, whatever is of value, is still going to be a place where you can go through SGE. But if that snippet of text is all you have to read, that traffic is not going to get to publishers, which is both painful but also realistic, looking at user behaviors. And even when I speak to a lot of people, and I think you can all relate to that to some level, our ultimate guides about, for example, JavaScript indexing, they're all going down in rankings with thousands of backlinks and hundreds of referring domains. And what ranks on top, and you see that probably in all verticals, is 5 bullet points with the answer. That's what user wants and want in most cases. And I highly recommend with playing with like SimilarWeb or any other tool set that's going to show you the length of engagement and amount of pages per visit. Publishers have a challenge that comes from a change in user behavior, and AI is somehow the answer to that. That's how I see that. So publishers will have to adapt, but they already face this problem. Most of the traffic going to publishers bounce. They have issues monetizing that and maintaining users. So this is a challenge both for publishers and for all the blogs out there. And I think we went through all of the comments. Thanks so much. This was a very guerrilla webinar today. I really wanted to push the research out there. We actually have publisher research already. We have marketplace. We have all these different verticals. We're just having challenges going through them and pushing that into slides and articles. But it's gonna slowly go out. I highly recommend checking your SGE status with ZipTie, even if you're just starting out. And I'm looking forward to probably the next one is going to be, next webinar is going to be focused about publishers, completely different data, and more research. Thank you so much, Christopher, as well. Thank you so much for coming. And it was a massive pleasure to talk to you today, folks. Oh, and dramatic focus change at the end. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.